Welcome back to the If I Knew You Better podcast. I'm Brendan Davis. I appreciate you listening. And today, this is a fun show, an especially fun show for me, because my guest is someone who I've known on and off for a while. And we'll talk about that as we go through this. The writer, director, Mr. Jonathan London. Jonathan, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing good, man. How are you, Brendan?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I saw your eyebrow when I said writer. I mean, you do write too, don't you? Or
I write the things that I shoot.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Writer, director, buddy.
And then when nobody wants to produce them, you end up producing them as well. So
yes.
I think that people just become the multi-hyphenates just out of necessity. And that's what led me to podcasting way back when was nobody wanted anything to do with me and as a filmmaker, and you just couldn't get arrested. So let's just start talking to ourselves and hoping people start jumping on board.
This is so perfect because we're going to get into that. Can you give us kind of a little bit more of a slightly more detailed self-introduction, kind of tell us a little bit about where you're from and just, a couple of quick things to frame this up, and then let's get into that.
Yeah. So basically, I'm a filmmaker, but I've been a podcaster for 15 years, started in 2005. But before that, what led me to film was broadcasting. I grew up in Austin, Texas, and I was always into pop culture. I think a lot of the listeners, this is a pretty common story where you read comic books and you're into movies and video games. The 80s and 90s were a perfect time for that stuff because the Hollywood blockbuster was around and the multiplexes were in service and the malls were in service. And you grew up in suburbia, as I did in Austin. That's the stuff that you would consume. And the stuff that always appealed to me, though, was talking to people, and my heroes early on were people like David Letterman, and then if you remember on Talk Soup, Greg Kinnear.
Of course, he was great on that before he became a movie star. That's what kind of launched him.
I really consumed a lot of that stuff, like whatever was on Comedy Central or E, I had an appetite for. So it was MST3K, and The Kids in the Hall was always preferred to SNL, and that was the diet. You listen to the Jerky Boys, and you watch Talk Soup, and so. I went to undergrad wanting to go into radio, and I did college radio for 4 years there. And I wanted to do an interview show, but coming in as a freshman, the seniors decide the time slots that you have and the people who run the radio station. So they gave me either an 8 a.m. or a 10 a.m. Sunday slot. It was, especially in college where Saturday nights are crucial to your social life, it was death, and nobody wanted to come on my show, but I wasn't going to pass up having a show just because the time slot stunk. I was going to make the best of it and play my music and interview people, but nobody was going to be on that show. It was live radio, and so you had to be there for the time slot, and I couldn't even get people to be awake, enough to listen, much less be at the radio station in Philadelphia to broadcast with me. So I started doing voices. I started interviewing people who didn't exist.
Awesome.
A whole bunch of characters that would come in, sit down, and do interviews with me. And they were outrageous. They were ridiculous. They were loud, and they were silly. And it was a lot like that stuff that I had consumed as a teenager. It was a lot like the loud characters that in scenarios that you'd have on either, Kids in the Hall or The State or MST3K. And so by I think sophomore year, the local station that we shared a building with, WXPN 88.5 Philadelphia, they were like, "Hey, do you want to do Sunday nights?" And by that time, the singers had cleared out and it was time to have somebody run the station. And I started working my way up the radio station. And so I took a Sunday night slot with my buddy Kevin on Sunday nights at 88.5 FM. And it's a massive radio station. They record a lot of shows that are syndicated nationwide. And I remember David Letterman would get a lot of his guests from World Cafe, which is a show that they record at 88.5 FM. And they had a studio. So we would invite a lot of the bands that were coming through Philadelphia to record music with us. And these were a lot of the bands that earlier, when I was in high school, I was really into punk rock. So, and I still am. I think it's part of the DIY ethic. So we would book bands in these mess halls or in, rec centers or bingo halls. And those bands really started to become popular in the late 90s. Like bands like Blink-182 and stuff like that really started from the mid 90s on becoming popular. And these bands now were becoming popular too. You get bands like Newfound Glory and Midtown and a lot of these suburban punk bands. And we'd have them roll up to the studio, bring their equipment in, and we would record them live and broadcast it. We had Blink 182 come in and we dressed like Mexican wrestlers. We were just having so much fun.
That's awesome.
That there had to start being a visual element to the radio show. I was not a filmmaker, but because so much of what we did was outrageous and in person, I think that element was quickly becoming something necessary. And this is before the internet. We didn't have streaming anything. We didn't have YouTube.
Right.
I don't even think we had Justin TV. So there was no streaming possible for this, but it was definitely something that we would have been filming and putting on YouTube if it hadn't been 1999 or 2000. You know what I mean? So
sure.
Picking up a camera and then making little short films was how I spent junior and senior year. Yeah. And that kind of led to the filmmaking.
And that's what kind of got you launched. What's funny, you said 88.5 was that big Philly station. I was a college DJ myself at University of Georgia in Athens during the mid-late 80s, and that was 88.5 WOG. And I got a show. There was a guy that started a show.
Public radio stations? Yeah.
I probably so. Yeah, there's certain bands that I think are reserved for public radio, college radio, things like that. But yeah, there was a guy that had a show, and I came in to sort of take over, called Loud Fast Rules. And it was like midnight to 2 a.m. on I think it was on Sunday night. But I played like GBH and all this the Descendants and stuff like that. And occasionally I'd keep them guessing because I was also like a metal guy. So I'd throw in like some Yngwie Malmsteen.
Yeah.
Or occasionally, when Stevie Ray Vaughan died, I was on air when the news broke, and I just kept repeating. I just played nothing but Stevie Ray album sides,
We would, they asked us if we wanted to do 10 p.m. to midnight or midnight to 2 a.m. And I just remember thinking, well, these guys go to sleep by midnight.
I got calls,
we will be able to do whatever. Yeah. We will be able to do whatever we want because the people running the radio station will be asleep. And we were doing characters on the air and doing really loud stuff. And the bands enjoyed it. They had fun. I still have a lot of those recordings. And, bands like Weezer and MXPX and that stuff. And we would just have them in there because
I'm so jealous right now.
Liked. Yeah, it was fun. So when I moved out, I went to grad school out of that point. I went to Columbia for film school. But I couldn't wait to get out to LA because I just wanted to shoot music videos. So when I moved out to LA, I used a lot of the contacts from radio to just start shooting music videos out here. And that was kind of the beginning of filmmaking for a check, was doing really indie music videos. And then you do a couple commercials and you just kind of work your way and you just keep doing shorts and writing. And somebody asked me about, if when I shoot this movie, there's a movie that you and I were talking about beforehand that coronavirus kind of put on pause. And somebody said, like, will that feel like a career? And I was like, no, this whole thing has felt like a career. Like Irvin Kershner was teaching USC right up and through directing Empire Strikes Back. Like, this is all the career. I met you through film teaching.
Exactly.
This is all part of the career. It's not like you're strictly making movies. Even now with Corona, I've shifted to developing a cartoon with a company. Like, you have to keep telling the stories and sharing and bringing people up while getting brought up. And so it's all part of a fluid career. It's not like you're just doing one track and knocking it out. You're not just making widgets,
I have a great quote for that. One of my mentors is a producer, a guy named Barry Berg. And I actually had him speak when we both taught there. We're both here in LA. When we taught here in LA and overlapped together, I had him speak for a group of students, like a big group at Warner Brothers, for one of those things where you bring a guest in and they talk about their career and answer questions. And somebody asked, it was about building your career and what if I'm an actress, but I also want to maybe direct. And he's like, you can do everything. He said, look, you may do 1,000 jobs, but there are fundamentally only two kinds of careers in the entertainment business: long and short. how you act is going to determine whether you have a long or short career. But it's all one big thing. And that's a paraphrase, but that's, I mean, I quote that a lot to people who are confused about maybe, you know, I feel like my heart, I was doing this, I was committed to this thing and I'm not really into it and I want to do this other thing, but it's just, there's a continuum, you know, I mean, this is part of why I was excited to talk with you because I know something of the scope. I don't know everything. We're about to learn more, but I know something of the scope of your, you know, your purview and your interests, and it's cool how it's all related. And yeah, you were an OG podcaster, 15 years.
Yeah, that was my itching to get back into broadcasting, and because I didn't feel like directing. By that point, I was doing commercials and music videos. And music videos, I was shooting 2 or 3 music videos for hire a month, and it takes a bit of metabolism to just creatively keep churning that stuff out and having a production element where you're making high quality stuff and hiring really good people, but you still have to pay them, and you have to pay them in an industry that is not being fueled financially anymore.
Right.
And I remember 2005 very well. And I remember I was shooting a Real Big Fish video for remember that? They're still playing. And so one of my closest friends, Scott Klopfenstein, I actually met him earlier in Philadelphia when I was doing radio, but I found myself in 2005 doing their video. And Scott and I are having lunch on one of the days that we were filming. And we're filming this video very independently in Orange County with the resources that the band had. And, you know, this had been 7-8 years removed from their big album. And so they were a couple albums down the chain. And I remember eating lunch and Scott said, you know, the budget for this video is the same as our wardrobe budget was on the last video.
Wow.
And so when I heard that, I was like, okay, so let's start figuring out what else I can do to be creative, and not necessarily even to like pay the rent, just to be creative, just to have, just to fulfill that need to express yourself. And a buddy of mine had started listening to podcasts and said, let's start a podcast. And I said, that sounds awesome, because I would love to find a way to get back into radio, but radio wasn't, you know, radio is a tough one to get into, especially in Los Angeles. Like, there are only that is a club that is completely saturated and does not need you in it. But podcasts, like nobody had heard of podcasts in 2005. There were a handful of them. So we started a podcast where we would talk about the things that came naturally to us, and as a film and comic book fans, and there's a huge glut of them now, but back in 2005, if you just made a podcast, you're in the top of the iTunes charts. There were no iTunes charts,
right?
You know, we weren't uploading to Libsyn or Pinecast, which I use. I love Pinecast; they're very small, but I love them. We weren't uploading to a spot and having everything proliferated for us. We had to edit our own XML feeds. We had to host our own files. I had to learn HTML just to get all this stuff done and make sure that iTunes could find it every time I uploaded a new episode. And, like, this was all stuff that we had to learn. And I remember like the 12th episode where I just like discovered keywords, and we had been discussing, Kevin Smith had Clerks 2 coming out. And I remember we talked about like the trailer or whatever. This is what we do on Geek Podcasts. Nothing's changed there. And I remember getting an email from someone who was like, hey, heard the episode. And I had misquoted Kevin Smith, who had said something in Wizard magazine. That is how bad this rabbit hole is going down.
Please keep going. It's great.
Kevin Smith had said something about Michael J. Straczynski's run on Spider-Man, in which Norman Osborn had goblin twins with Gwen Stacy when Peter went abroad. And it was like something Michael Straczynski worked into Spider-Man. Yeah. And Kevin Smith had an opinion on it, and I paraphrased the opinion and shared it, and I got it wrong. And then I end up with an email from someone claiming to be Kevin Smith being like, hey, I heard the podcast, loved it, would love to come on the show and talk to you. And I remember reading that email and being like, okay. And I responded and said, F you, you're not Kevin Smith. Like, there's no way.
Yeah. And I know how this is going because I've only met him in passing a time or two, but please, I'm not going to spoil your lead. But that's the kind of thing that Kevin would do back in the day and probably still does.
And it's because we use that Clerks 2 hashtag, you know what I mean? Or whatever the keyword was.
Somebody saw it and showed him,
Because he responded and was like, he just embedded a link in the email and said, and the link said, when I clicked on it, was to his website where he had posted an entire page as himself, and all it said was,
Nice.
"It is me, Jonathan. Would love to come on the show still. When can we do it?" And I was like, "Next week." So next week he came on the show. He brought in an audience, and we did. And that was kind of it. And I just I started Geekscape later that year. I remember Kevin saying, like, when he was like, "This is all you do? You talk into a microphone and then you upload it?" And we were like, "Yeah." And he just said, "I don't have to go to colleges anymore. I don't have to," because he had been touring colleges to get it all out. And he was like, I'm just gonna do this." And he has to fantastic effect, and it's been great. I saw him briefly at LA Comic Con this past year. I was hosting a main stage panel as he was ending his main stage panel, and we passed each other, and he was like, "Hey man, what's up?" Da, da, da. But there's no way he recognizes me as anything but the face that like was his first podcast.
That's so cool.
He's done so many and interacted with so many people since. It's like, but that's definitely one I'm claiming.
Yeah, I would too, man. And then that's well. So your pod. Just let me ask you, Lee. So when you sat down with him, I mean, he's known now, and of course, he's a fan of the smoky treats, which can make you very loquacious, and he is anyway. So now he does like these 3-4 hour shows sometimes. Was your talk with him sort of more within like an hour-ish, or what? Or did it go for half a day?
I think we did 2 hours, and we actually released them split into 2 separate hours because back then the video iPod was still something that people used to consume. This was before iPhones, where people, and obviously before YouTube. This was 2000. This is early 2006 at this point. I remember it's February 2006. So YouTube wasn't anything that you uploaded to yet, and if you did, you had a 10-minute time limit on YouTube. You weren't uploading hour-long things. You definitely weren't podcasting to YouTube.
Sure.
So long form, if you wanted to do a long form podcast, you had to create an MP4. So basically, you had to record to tape. So we would record a mini DV, encode the mini DV, edit it in Final Cut or something, and then export M4Vs or MP4s. And then those would go up parallel with our MP3s. So we actually had 2 feeds. We had a feed for video and feed for audio, and you could subscribe to either. But if you subscribe to video, you would get an M4V or an MP4 that you could watch on your iPod, iPod video. And that was really popular for a long time. And I kept with it long past when I shouldn't have, where I should have just, I should have just dropped to MP3 or embraced YouTube. I probably should have done that sometime in the late 2000s. I should have just said, okay, let's take, I should have just kept I should have just kind of kept my eye on what YouTube was doing and whether or not they were expanding their time limits, because I've always wanted to do a show like I do today, where I'm talking to people in depth for an hour or so,
right,
and getting to know them. So the idea that I was going to chop things into 10-minute segments just wasn't going to happen for me. And that was YouTube's time limit. When YouTube started expanding that stuff, I had no idea. I probably would have just started putting my episodes up there. And now we stream our episodes live. So we go live through YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, etc. at once. So I don't know, picking up on old times, it ain't going to make a difference, but I actually, I enjoy it. I enjoy streaming live, and I enjoy still doing long form,
Have you put the archives up on YouTube now? Have you done one of those tricks where I can talk to you offline? I could learn a lot from you actually, from some of the ways you publish, but there's some of those great apps like repurpose.io that will take your feed and do a little, it might be like bonus listens or something.
Those episodes are so cringy. If you listen to the
you don't want them out there.
Well, as MP3s, those episodes still absolutely exist in the main Geekscape feed. If you subscribe to the Geekscape feed, no matter what hundreds of episodes you'll find in there, you can still scroll back and listen to every episode going back to episode 1.
Yeah,
that's easy. The video content, that one's hard because I'm not proud of myself as a broadcaster, because you've seen the growing pains, and not that I'm a good broadcaster now, but I think that the things that I care about as an entertainer or as somebody somebody in a conversation are way better than waiting for somebody else's mouth to close just so you can make a stupid joke or work on your type 5. And that, I think, is the death of a lot of podcasters, is that they come out and they say, okay, well, I'm a comedian or I'm an entertainer in this other field. I'm going to use this to showcase my talent. And I can't listen to that stuff. I can't listen to the equivalent of a morning zoo of a bunch of kids hanging out in an apartment together.
Yeah.
And they're just trying to use stupid, crass humor. I did that for 8, 9, 10 years. And the other thing is, I was also talking about other people's films, and we were reviewing a lot on the podcast. And as you start making content, the podcast led to meeting people like George Romero and Simon Pegg and all these people that turned into Dock of the Dead, which is a documentary we made for Epics that GEEKSCAPE co-produced. And that, that stuff came out of GEEKSCAPE. But then when you're having people like Simon Pegg on the podcast, you get more listeners, of course, but you also get a lot of professional people watching what you're doing.
Exactly.
And when you start reviewing their material or talking about it, and you're trying to make stupid jokes and type 5s,
you look like
you're gonna
jerk.
You're gonna end up with an email in your inbox saying, "Hey, man, didn't appreciate what you said."
Yeah.
And that might be somebody you want to collaborate with. And you just made fun of. I mean, you know how hard it is, Brendan, to make a really good movie, and there's so many things that can go wrong in making content. And you just made fun of it, and that could have been the result of them losing a battle financially, them losing a battle with a producer, them losing a battle in any of the millions of ways that you can mess up content. And here's Jonathan making fun of it, and then I get an email, and I'm like, oh.
Yeah, there's a real person and team of people involved on that, and they did their best. And I always tell people, if they ask, it's like, even just making a bad movie is hard. Making a good movie is damn near impossible. It gets done, but it always feels like a little bit of a miracle when you have the thing come together and it's...
And you're just ripping on people. Yeah. I didn't think it was cool. And then and people made it known to me that wasn't cool, which I thank them for every single day, because I was so far down the road that when you have a lot of listeners, you're just like, oh, this must be working. But your listeners are people like you. Your listeners are kids who are also consuming stuff. So the phrase from sports radio comes in, where it's like, sports radio is losers talking about winners. And I didn't want to be somebody who was just talking about people in the game. I wanted to be in the game.
Exactly.
And I was keeping myself from the game by being the person who just talks shit on people. I'm sorry. I don't even know if I can curse.
Oh, yeah. No, I slapped the explicit on here. Just be yourself.
That was a wake-up call, and it's not what I wanted to be about. I wanted to be of something, not about something, right? I didn't want to be cursory to it. I wanted to be, I wanted to be contributing to it.
That's the pull quote for the show notes.
Sure.
Right there.
So now GEEKSCAPE's a lot more about storytelling and talking to people about why they do it and the mental, emotional, kind of psychological reason that people developed into storytellers. I'm not saying that we're not funny. I'm not saying that we don't just end up cracking ourselves up and acting stupid. But when I'm sitting down with somebody who's spent 2 years of their lives on a film, or they've spent a year on an album, or they've been hired to play a character and they've thrown themselves into inhabiting this role, there's a lot more things going on there that are interesting than just waiting for their mouths to close so you can say some stupid line or making fun of it. And if there's something I don't like and the filmmaker sitting across from me, you know what? You were challenged by it. And that's how I frame it. I say that I found elements of the movie challenging. I found some of these things tough. Tell me how you feel about it. And usually you get the filmmakers to say, you know what? We were shooting under these circumstances, or that came about in this way.
They give you context, and then you're like, oh, okay. You may still not like the choice, but you appreciate why it was made.
And we're just talking about problem solving at that point.
Right. And then you can talk about the actual craft and the working of it. Not the high-minded stuff, but the actual, here's how we make the donuts. And
it just
Sometimes you don't get the
elevates
sugar and you have to improvise or whatever,
the conversation's immediately is immediately elevated beyond throwing rocks at people.
Yeah, yeah.
So long explanation why I won't probably put some of the old content back on YouTube.
No, I appreciate
No,
that. I
that's like
appreciate that.
I don't. You know what? That stuff's MP3 available, and as far as
But you
video
don't need to
goes, it's
shine
like,
you don't need to shine a 2020 spotlight on it. Basically, just let it be
Brendan, I
there
almost
for
got in a fist
for
fight.
the deep dive folks. But
I almost got in a fight with the director of Boondock Saints, like on the show.
Because you were kind of showing your ass a little bit, and
well, he came, he said some stuff towards me.
He was known for showing his. I should be fair.
And so I retorted because I'm not going to have that. We're literally sitting in my office. Like, come on, man. Like, and so I responded to him, and things got a little uncomfortable. And I just remember, Brian, my camera guy, like being like, "Oh shit, am I gonna have to stop?
It's about to go down.
Do something?" And I was just like, "Back off," which sinks because after we did the episode, we hung out on my porch for another hour just talking filmmaking, and he's a nice guy. I don't, but I mean, that was 10 years ago. So that kind of stuff happens. I'd rather develop productive relationships,
of course,
than that kind of stuff. And he was a cool guy. At the end of the day, everybody's been really cool. You just may not agree with their storytelling. It's not a reason to go at somebody.
Exactly.
I can hang out with rap rockers all you want. I don't need to listen to rap rock.
Nice. Well, I want to actually, and we could just talk about that, and it'll come back up, I think, in other ways, because probably some of the references will relate to people that you might have met through GEEKSCAPE, your show. But I'm interested, and take this where you want. I'm not gonna be. I'm more Barbara Walters than Geraldo Rivera, so I'm not going to try to open any secret rooms and blow the dust off. But knowing something of your, I mean, you come from this really interesting kind of, as I understand, family background, and Austin is a special place. People now, of course, know of Austin, but I mean, Austin. The reason that it has had this esteem is because it's been this kind of oasis of sorts in the heart of Texas, in the southern heart of Texas for quite a while. And it's not, it's a very special place. And I guess here's the thing I'm really interested in, man, is how do you think kind of describe the world from whence you came and how you think that, I'm interested how that opens your eyes to different things about arts and literature. And one of my last jobs as a sound man was I spent 1.5 years on and off on the road with the WWE. And I wasn't friends with him, but I was acquainted with your brother, who's a famous professional wrestler, Paul London. So I mean, I don't know if I'm putting that together right. I mean, was he already sort of getting out there before you were out there, or was it vice versa? I mean, it's unrelated in a bit, but basically, how did your upbringing
first?
Go ahead.
And that upbringing was my two brothers and I growing up in Austin, and we're Mexican American. My mother's from Guadalajara. My father's from the Panhandle of Texas. So right there, you have, access to a little bit of diversity. We spent summers with our grandparents in Guadalajara, and we spent the rest of our time in Austin. But Austin is exactly as you described. It's the live music capital of the world. It is keep Austin weird. It is a great place for ideas, and it allowed me to discover things like Richard Linklater, and obviously Robert Rodriguez became like a local hero. But that stuff obviously leads you to when you start moving to the Northeast, as I did, it's like, by the time I was done with high school, you wanted to see like where Jim Jarmusch made movies and things like that. But I was into indie films as a consumer and appreciating it in high school. I was into all that storytelling in high school. I liked all that stuff. I went to see, those Richard Linklater movies,
like Slacker and such.
Slacker. I just remember being like, "Wait, you can make a movie out of this?"
Yeah.
But then it wasn't until I got into school later on and started watching films in undergrad that I started seeing stuff like, Oh yeah, like Agnes Varda does make movies like that, and you can't just make a movie where you spend time going character to character. And obviously, Clerks played a role in that, and I'm so appreciative that that movie came along. And I remember going to see those movies at the indie theaters there in Austin. And some people grow up and they don't have indie theaters near them,
Yeah, and
and we
you had a
had
bunch of them.
a ton. And then you add the music element to that, where live performance is a big part of Austin, and my my way of getting into that was listening to punk and making basement shows and making rec center shows, and that was kind of how I made friends with other weirdos, because I did feel weird coming, being in a big football high school, which, Drew Brees, who's in the news today, he was our quarterback. I graduated with Drew.
Okay.
And that school was a dominant football school. People from my class, not just from my school, from the graduating class, ended up in the NFL, ended
Yeah.
up in the NBA. Like, it was a big sports school. And for somebody who ran track a little bit and really just wanted to read comics and watch movies and veg out on pop culture with no real inclination of ever creating beyond talking about the stuff, which is we talked about earlier in broadcasting, like, I just didn't know what else I was going to do. I thought maybe I'd go to UT because they have a great broadcasting program, and I'd pursue radio and broadcasting through there. And my brother had kind of, he was a really good athlete. My younger brother, Paul, was a really good athlete. And, he would make the basketball team and this and that. He was just physically talented. We had an older brother named Daniel who was 2 years ahead of me, and he was a skateboarder. And kind of the first time I saw a dude get an earring, the first time I saw a guy with a shaved head,
Oh,
first
wow.
time I saw
He was that guy for you.
Yeah, but
He was the gateway
he
into
was the
like kind
gay
of
guy
cool
who,
punk rocky culture, surf skate punk kind of culture.
well, he was into the Red Hot Chili Peppers and all those bands early on. So you start listening to that stuff in like the late 80s, and you start realizing like, oh, there's like a place called California and they make this music. You know what I mean? Like this is crazy.
Right.
Which is fun, but Austin had its share of that stuff too. So when you knew about bands like the Red Hot Chili Peppers, you start discovering bands like the Butthole Surfers, and you start discovering stuff that's happening locally that you're like, oh wait, this stuff is happening in these little rec centers and places, because I can't get into the clubs where bands like that are
They were
playing.
like 21 and up, and you're still like a high school guy. Or
Right. I remember not being able to go see Green Day tour for Kerplunk because they were playing a 21 and up club, but I wanted to see Green Day perform at Kerplunk. And I remember figuring it out, right? And the luck is that my third grade teacher ran Liberty Lunch. He was my third or fourth grade teacher. His name's Mark Prats. We've reconnected on Facebook. And he ran a nightclub in Austin and was my teacher. And that place, everyone played there. And I remember seeing everyone there, and there's rumors that they're going to bring it back in some form, even now, 20 years later after they close, because the branding it's just classic historical Austin.
Did
And
they do all ages shows, or would that help kick that off?
They did all ages shows.
Oh, that's the
and
best,
I was
man.
allowed to go there because he was my third grade teacher, and that just blew the doors off it. And so I just threw myself into the music. And when there weren't enough shows at the place I was allowed to go to, we'd make our own shows in the basements. And so many great bands came out of there that ended up becoming big bands. Like the first band that started Fueled by Ramen, the first band Fueled by Ramen signed, and Fueled by Ramen ended up bringing us Fall Out Boy and Panic at the Disco and so many big bands. Their first band was The Impossibles from Austin, Texas.
Really?
And those were all our friends. And so that got me to meet the people at Fueled by Ramen and start shooting videos for Fueled by Ramen. But you just end up in a situation where, like, that weird is awesome, storytelling is possible, and for my brother, performance is possible on a bigger stage. And so Awesome was like the best incubation for that kind of mixture of, we don't have to do it like them, that we can still do it. Would I still live in Austin today? Yes, but like the summer before my senior year in high school, I had called my older brother to return a NoFX CD, and on the way over one night, he's hit by a drunk driver and killed. And I could not get out of Austin fast enough. And I think it was the same for Paul. We were like, okay, this place that was like a really awesome place to grow up, it's turned into a ghost town for us. It is a place that is a man, that year that I still had to live in Austin, my senior year in high school, was just Twilight Zone. And it's just one of those things where, looking back 20 years later, 20 plus years later, is like I I don't I have nothing but empathy for that kid who had to figure things out, and dealing with the things that I'm dealing with internally all these years later. I wished I wished therapy on that kid because
Yeah.
the fallout from that event is the stuff that shaped my life for the next 20 years, and it it makes you fearful, it makes you angry, it destroys your awareness, it makes you self-centered. I think if we were talking about the early years of the podcast, I think you hear somebody who's angry. I think you hear somebody who's reactive. I think you hear somebody who's artificially offensive in the just out of a need to be heard, but does not want to be understood. It was a defense,
Yeah.
and I think that's a danger. I think there's a huge danger in wanting to be heard, but refusing to be understood. And I was not interested for 20 years in bridging that gap, in letting another human being understand me. I had no interest in therapy. And so when I listen to myself on the old radio shows, or I listen to myself, I see some of my films, or I think about some of my relationships or the friendships that have ended.
Yeah.
I think about that night where everything just got broken. And it's been such a long road out of that place. But it cost me, again, friendships. I think it cost me my marriage. I think
Yeah.
it cost me a lot of my career. I think I thought I deserved to fail. I think that I sabotaged myself many times. I remember getting phone calls from people at networks and cable networks where they'd heard about me because of my short film or my relationships or some of the videos that I'd made. And I remember phone calls where they were like, "Hey, do you want to take a stab at this?" And I would talk myself out of it. I would
Mm.
talk myself out of so many great opportunities because I thought that pain and failure was a comfortable place to be. And everything outside of the normalization of pain was scary. It was so scary. And so you just lower your standards. You lower what you're going, you kind of let your dreams shrink a little bit. And meanwhile, you start to see the people who you went to grad school with, and they start to make blockbusters. They start to win Oscars. They start to even get like Spirit Awards and things like that. And you see these people who were your collaborators but 5 years ago, and they're popping off because they have their talents, but you think that you have the same talent that they have, and you do. But what you don't have is you don't have that same engine, because you don't know how to turn on that switch, and you don't know how to point your turn your rudder and point your ship directly at the fear,
Yep.
because there was nothing I was scared more of than to reach some kind of a height and then fall again.
Right.
Which is crazy. I look at it now and I've
totally
like,
understandable.
It's crazy. But it was 20 years of that stuff, Brennan.
Yeah.
Like 20 years of it.
What?
That's insane.
What changed? Because you're in a different place now. I mean, I'm from talking to you and stuff, and you're talking about the early days, and of course, you just made it really clear why you're not overly eager to revisit the early days of the archives, and like you have no interest in revamping, even if it's somebody's cool, even if somebody cool is there, you don't want to go back, So I started podcasting as a mental health exercise as a guy in Beijing who, I speak I speak enough Chinese, like I can get around, I can order food, chit chat but I can't have any real conversations. So I started as a mental health exercise as a guy alone, and you know me, we both, we're being our more professional self on this, but then we can both talk people's ears off and have a big back and forth dialogue. I couldn't get close to that. So for me, podcasting was a way to work out my feelings about being, an expat and such. I assume that the early days of that helped for you. But in terms of where you are now, you're the guy who just told me that really moving story. And thank you for sharing that, because I know how close to the bone that is about Daniel. But like what changed for you in the kind of the more recent years that you're sort of, you've got a whole different perspective on this than when I first heard you addressing it, maybe say 10 years ago if it came up in social media or something. It seemed like you're in a different place anyway.
What do I have to lose? Like, I remember the night after Daniel was killed, being on 6th Street in Austin, notorious as the party drinking center of Austin.
Tons of drunks. Austin is a drinking town. So if you got to drink, drinking's a bad thing in your life, that's a hard place to be.
Well, 24 hours after that happened, I was out there with flyers, just shoving flyers in people's hands just to try and keep them from driving drunk without thinking about it. Like, I came out with such a fire in me, and it was this no time to lose, this complete embrace of the fact that life is finite. And I remember just going after it because I was angry and just wanted to enact change or do something. And it wasn't well thought out. It was just, I remember I would spend every spring break and through college speaking for Mother's Day drunk driving in high school. It's like, what a party animal I turned out to be. But
you're wearing a shirt that says drug free.
I am, aren't I? I had this Superman complex, and meanwhile, my brother Paul is, he's flexing in his own way, and he's getting out, and he's trying to find his escape. And, so we both have these complexes that are built around the pop culture that we were brought up with. Right. He loved wrestling. He's always loved pro wrestling, and that was always what he understood. And I always loved storytelling, and that is always what I understood. And and that's what the podcast has turned into and is always supposed to turn into. So that was always our way out. But the story that I wasn't telling was mine. And I kept hitting these walls, Brendan. Like, I ended up in relationships, especially my main one, where I was the loneliest dude ever because I was afraid to share. And I wasn't letting anybody in. And meanwhile, you're a storyteller and you're supposed to be screaming, and you're supposed to be expressing. And I was afraid that if I did that, I get hurt again. And ultimately, you work yourself to a point where you don't have any more options. And emotionally, it can't get worse than where you're at. And I'll tell you, because I've seen your fitness journey over the last couple of years, and that was it. And it paralleled that fitness journey where I remember must have been a little over 10 years ago, not being happy with where I was physically and wanting to get out. And that turned into, leaving the house at 5 a.m. to go running, 4:30 a.m. You end up in the middle of nowhere, maybe getting eaten by a mountain lion because there's still fog out. You're running through Griffith Park.
Always a possibility in Griffith Park.
Totally. Yeah. And you're sitting there, and then it's like Griffith Park, every trail in Griffith Park. So now you go out to the Angeles and you start exploring the Angeles Crest or the Santa Monica Mountains. You start, going out there while there's still fog. You start finishing your runs while there's still fog. You come back to the parking lot before there's cars in it. And some of that's being unhappy in my relationship, and some of that is absolutely being unhappy with my relationship with myself. Yeah, and being like, hey man, that fuck up you did back in the late 90s, you can still get punished for it. Yeah, you still did that. Yeah, exactly. You wanted to know, you invited him over to return a No Effects CD. Like, what? What are you doing?
You blame yourself for that?
No, well, that's part of the process too. Is like so people would joke. They're like, "What are you running from?" And I'd be like, "No, I'm running towards things. I'm running towards my goals." And it was bullshit. Like,
I was going to ask you if you were running
like
to or from. I mean, now I think you're running
no,
to,
yeah, I think
but
now I'm
back
running
then
too
probably from.
because there are so many things I want to do that I have to maintain this meat cage long
Yeah.
enough to achieve them
Yeah.
all.
Oh,
You
I got
know,
so much. That's why I
like
dropped as of today,
totally.
110 pounds. I got another 30. It's like I got a lot of time to make up for, man. I was a slow
You,
learner. I was a
I
late
blew
bloomer.
it.
I didn't start
Like,
to get halfway cool till I was in my 30s.
I came out of
I got
film
so much time to
school
make up for.
when I came out of film school, I had the film that was winning awards. I had the deal at a TV network. I had all my ideas out there. Like I came out like a
Wow.
rocket.
Yeah.
You know, I was making content for like so many
Yeah. These
places.
labels. Yeah. You're
But
working with stuff where
you
you're
just
out there.
run out of energy because what you're doing isn't tapped into anything. It's not tapped into you. And I was
Yeah.
so disconnected from myself that I thought all that stuff would just come right back because it didn't take much of an investment to get in the first place because I wasn't investing in anything. I
Yeah.
was just
Yeah.
making stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a form of storytelling in Hollywood that will absolutely let you survive with that kind of storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
It was not anything that made me happy.
Right.
And so I started writing. I would go out on these runs over the course of decades. And the runs came from having to walk a 5K to doing ultra marathons
Yeah.
because I couldn't be out there long enough. And
Yeah.
you're out there with nothing but yourself. And it's not like you're playing a video game, right? It's not like you're making options. Your choices are slow down or speed up. You are
Mm-hmm.
left with
Mm-hmm.
nothing but your thoughts. And it turned me into more of a writer. And the things that I started wanting to write about like were cathartic. And so I started writing about things like my marriage. I started writing a love letter to my younger brother. It didn't mean these things weren't funny. My love letter to my younger brother is a fantasy series in which he's a failed pro wrestler, long time retired, and he gets swept up to an alien planet and has to fight minotaurs. Like it's a fantasy. It's like a galaxy quest about a pro wrestler, right?
And he would probably think that's so freaking awesome. Did you write something that you thought he would just like be thrilled to see, basically?
We try and work on that all the time. We've shot sizzles for it. We've made posters for it. Doug Jones from Hellboy and Pan's Labyrinth played our evil wizard. Like we are pushing Hero of the Prophecy all the time. It is a combination of He-Man and Galaxy Quest and Army of Darkness and pro wrestling and all the Golden Globus 80s fantasy movies, sword and sandal movies we saw growing up. Like
it sounds perfect for like it sounded perfect for 10 years ago. It sounds perfect for the near-term future because like, after this is over, we do not want to be anywhere near reality. Like we're going to want awesome escapist, meaningful but fun things that can get you out of your day to day. You know, we're going to need that more than ever as we come out of this current bullshit.
For me, it was just like just telling my brother I love him. For me, it just came out of being like seeing that his career, for the most part, was in the WWE. His limelight, his like big spotlight career, was maybe behind him. Seeing how he was processing seeing what it was doing to him emotionally and mentally. And being like, no, I can't lose another brother. So I remember going crazy on Hero of the Prophecy as like a love letter to him, being like, hey, I wrote you a story in which you start where you are now and you are a hero again.
Awesome.
And I remember we were at Simi Valley filming a shot of him up on a rock swinging a sword. And we tried to visually emulate Beastmaster. And Beastmaster was using these like really cool tinted glass things to make the atmosphere not look like Earth. So there was like really cool, like weird purples and things in the shots. And we were obviously doing that stuff in post, but I remember shooting one of those shots where they had a lot of sky that we could mess with. And the director of Beastmaster emailed me while I'm shooting the shot. I checked my email and he's like, hey, can I come on Geekscape? And it was
really?
awful. It was
he heard
all
you talking
circle.
about it
He had a movie coming out and just randomly, coincidentally, he emailed me as we're shooting a love letter stylistically to his movie. So things happen. It's like kismet, you know, things just happen.
Nice, man. Well, I remember seeing, I saw a version of this deck, I guess, the work in progress of this at some point, and I thought that is so perfect for you and Paul to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, I was writing about the things that I was wrestling with, no pun intended,
Hey,
but
well,
because
pun received.
because the movie I was telling you about before we started recording was
Yeah.
absolutely about my divorce. But like, I started writing about the things that you're wrestling with, but it's okay to write about them through a prism.
Yeah.
And I think it helps you process.
Sure.
And fiction sometimes gives you that distance that you need to look at things accurately. And it sounds like that's not the way things should work, but you got to steer towards the fear, and you got to steer towards the pain, because that stuff is not going away.
Yeah.
That stuff will just fester.
Well, part of what is, I may or may not cut this out for the audience. Maybe I'm leaving this in. You'll know if you're hearing it, audience, because I'm getting to something, but it might take me a long way around the barn to get the question perfect. But or maybe I'll just set the context, and you'll know how to respond in your own way. But from everything you're saying, we all figure things out to some degree as we go along. Some people are a little more, have it figured out right out of the gate, and some of us are slow learners like me. And there's people everywhere in between. But your evolution, again, just using Geekscape as a way to track it, right? From that young, immature guy trying to process some really hot stuff for him personally and trying to figure all this stuff out and kind of raging against the world, to where you are now. And you clearly, and again, we were talking offline a bit, and I follow, we were friends and follow each other on socials and stuff. So you clearly still have, if anything, is as intensive a fire as ever, is what I'm seeing and hearing and getting, but it's being channeled in a different way. And, there's age, there's maturity, there's perspective, there's 20 years of beating your head against a wall going, yeah, maybe stop doing that. That thing that hurts, don't do that. You've obviously had all these epiphanies and things that have led to these changes in yourself. How are you looking down the road? How do you think that this, we don't even have to talk too much about, but we're recording this in the middle of the global pandemic, and now we've got race and class wars, sort of like the pregame show is happening now for America version, 5.0 or whatever we're up to now. But how do you think you're going to come out of this? The short term is, how are we going to make it work? But there will be some new normal where we'll be able to go out and do the things. We won't have the restrictions in terms of movement and social, we'll be able to go do that at some point. So when there are no artificial restrictions is where really I want you to think from that point forward. How do you think your work's going to change? Because I've, again, we talked offline at one point where I think I was probably trying to pitch myself to you for Geekscape. Then I realized, at the time I was not a Geekscape guest, and what you're telling me sounds like I might be now, or at least like the kind of conversations you have moved into are a little more like what we're doing, only probably with a zillion more pop culture references thrown in. So
yeah, there's a lot of Spider-Man.
But it sounds like it's more of the thoughtful and the under the hood mechanics and the human emotion and what's the tragedy that led to the triumph and this and that. How are you going to be approaching? How do you think you're going to be approaching, like, whatever this next phase of your career moving forward once we're kind of in a new situation?
Well, I don't see this as a break. I don't see the quarantine and the pandemic and what's happening in the United States with the George Floyd murder and the ensuing protests as a break. I see this as something that has always happened. We knew this, that America, we knew in November 2016 that America was going to end up like this.
Yeah, totally.
Hundreds of years. If you've seen Poltergeist, you don't build shit on an Indian burial ground. And that whole damn country was built on it.
Exactly.
Come on. This is a big problem. And talking specifically about California, I'll tell you what the next one's going to be. The next one's going to be the treatment of our laborers. Knowing that we have this agricultural economy that's the strongest in the United States and provides so much food for the United States and the world, but it's built on the backs of people who are getting paid less than minimum wage,
like
are
$3-5
not citizens,
an hour,
and have to come here illegally for us to exploit them.
Yeah.
That's the next powder keg. So
Mm-hmm.
there's always going to be a fuse that's running. As a storyteller, you have to figure out how to do it. The wrinkle that's been thrown to us right now is social distancing. And this is just humanity. And we've developed opposable thumbs and came out of and started being able to climb into the trees to avoid getting killed. And
Right,
we
right.
developed fire. We developed all these things by evolving. And technology is that next thing that you have to use to evolve. Like we created a wheel so we could build and we could
Mm-hmm.
travel and
Mm-hmm.
we could conquer and we could keep going. And there are so many wheels out there. And I don't want to be the person who's like, yep, the future's the kids, technology,
Yeah.
things are getting smaller, things are getting faster. Like we all have to embrace that.
Yeah.
And so, like just socially things are changing that you have to adapt with. You have to keep adapting or you're dead, and that's always how it's been, and this doesn't change that. So are we moving towards animation? Sure, but films already were. You've seen a Marvel movie, you've seen
Yeah.
The Mandalorian. There's so
Yeah.
many animated elements in so
Yeah.
many
Yeah.
movies anyway. Are we moving towards remote filming? Yeah, but we've done that. Are we moving towards virtual reality? Absolutely. But you've seen that.
Sure.
You know, when they started bringing 3D glasses back into theaters, we know that they're going to end up being goggles or contact lenses
Oh,
or
yeah.
anything that's going to Bluetooth with our phones that we bought the tickets from, so
Yep.
that the
Yep.
phones know what we bought on Amazon, so they know what to advertise for us in the movie, and they know who our best actors are,
Oh, yeah.
so we can throw their faces on the actors. Like
Wow, man.
we're all working towards an individually targeted experience
Right.
that is going to have cultural ramifications, and we as filmmakers have to figure out how to do it. How do we make a movie that resonates still on a popular level while providing an individualized catharsis? These are all questions that we continue to grapple with, but ultimately, if I'm trying to bridge the gap from me to you, I can't go all the way. You know, or I'm making a children's book and I'm over explaining
Mm-hmm.
things. And at the
Mm-hmm.
same time,
Mm-hmm.
I can't just go to the ends of my nose, or I'm making something so experimental that you're never going to be able to access. I
Right.
still have to look you in the eye and meet you halfway, hoping that there's alchemy between the story that I'm putting out, built on my own singular experiences, and the singular experiences that you, as a complete stranger, have brought to the discussion. And when those things meet in the middle, you have that connection. And it's not done by throwing a giant net out there and making a generic ass story.
Mm-hmm.
It's done with a song lyric. Because, Brandon, if I were to ask you to put a song in your head right now,
Yeah.
you'd put a melody in there, or you'd put a chorus, or you'd put a song lyric. You wouldn't put the whole damn
Mm-hmm.
song. What do you think of Empire Strikes Back? Oh, you just thought of Empire Strikes Back? I bet you thought of a specific image or scene.
Yeah.
You didn't think of
Yeah.
the whole movie. So what you've got
Exactly.
to do is you've got to take those specific voices and those specific images and movements in your own head, and that's all you got. And you got to figure out technologically or however you can how to just throw that stuff into the conversation, and hope that someone comes and meets you there, because they're going to resonate. That's going to resonate. If you make it too generic, it's gonna skip right off the water, right? Or
Yeah.
let's say it's a net. The fish are going to swim right through the holes.
Yeah.
So the big problem in my career for the last 20 years was not wanting to be that specific,
Mm-hmm.
and not wanting to use a spear to hunt for the stories inside of myself,
Right.
because I was scared. So, like, God forbid someone make a connection with me. You know, God forbid someone finds anything out. So whatever technology does, whatever society does, coming out of this small period that we're in right now,
Mm-hmm.
those are still the tools you're going to use. Am I developing stuff beyond film? Yeah, absolutely. We're developing some really cool things. Does this put a little bit of a slow burn on some of those ideas based on the requirements of meeting in person, or maybe some of the worries that financiers or bond companies or insurance
Sure.
companies
Sure.
have? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Does that give you an excuse to stop? Absolutely not. Like, you have to
I've
keep
never
going.
been busier.
So,
I've never been busier than I am right now, actually.
Right.
In terms of development, I mean, we can't go shoot yet, and we had, again, I told you some details offline, but we had a financier who got really hammered and scared because of COVID and the market, they just perfect storm, and they had to drop out.
Can your story be told with sock puppets? Like at the end of the day, you're going to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
At the end of the day, you're going to figure out how to do it.
Well, that's an awesome answer. And some of the things you said are the things that people who are looking ahead at the future of entertainment and the customization and the idea of like you individually in your goggles, you can remap, Brad Pitt onto the character instead of Keanu or whatever,
Sure.
And that's amazing. In terms of the types of, do you find that your taste is changing in terms of the sorts of stories you want to tell?
No, there's a lot of whack-a-mole going on. I think that there's usually a one consistent theme, but I think ultimately the way that materializes has a lot of different faces. So like, telling an emotional story sometimes turns into a comedy. We were thinking of one just before we started recording. My friend Guy and I, who's stuck in Sao Paulo, we did a film 4 years ago in Sao Paulo that is based a little bit on my life and a lot on his, because he comes from a music background down in Brazil. And so that's really the backdrop of the film. And I can't play a note on anything. And so we collaborated on this movie. We were talking about kind of the next one. But I think it's a comedy, and you just kind of have to follow the voices. And if it turns into a drama, it turns into a drama. If it turns into a comedy, it turns into a comedy. But none of these things have to be one or the other. We're not binary. Nothing's binary. I think that we've been forced to think of things binary in a binary fashion of ones and zeros because of the way that we're consuming content. And it's either Marvel or DC, or it's either Republican and Democrat, or it's either this or that, because the distribution channels don't know how to do things in a complex fashion because they're an assembly line and they have to churn this stuff out at such a pace that all they can do is dumb it down. But you and I don't have to do that. We can make stuff at our own pace. And so if I want to make a comedy that suddenly has a really deep dramatic moment, my comedy just got way better than that comedy. And and vice versa. If there's a dramatic film that you went to see and suddenly you're laughing,
there's like laugh out loud set piece that is totally appropriate for the characters, but it's not the tone you were just in. Crazy, funny stuff happens in the worst situations.
It's
Real.
life.
Yeah,
that
it's
is
real.
life, and that resonates. So you just have to keep making these things individually, and like I said, being as specific as possible with the languages you're using, and just doing the personal paleontology enough to go deeper and deeper and see what the most specific thing is that you can pull out, because that is your most effective tool for catching someone's ear or eye or heart who's consuming that. You know what I mean? And so as far as technology goes and society goes, you just got to keep moving along with everything, because that's how it's always been. We're in a river, and it
ain't waiting for us. It's still moving. It's still moving. All of it. People, technology.
Film has existed for just film, which is the combination of so many other art forms, from photography to music to sound, like writing, spoken word, like that stuff. It's existed for over 100 years without you. It doesn't need you. None of these art forms need you. They're not going to wait for you. You can't use this stuff as an excuse. You can't be like, oh, well, there's a pandemic. I guess I'm not going to tell my story. So I'm only joking when I say, Brendan, can it be told with sock puppets? But you know what?
I knew that was rhetorical. You could.
Brendan sits too long. It's sock puppet time, or it's animation time, or it's VR experience time, or told through Zoom dance time. No, I'm kidding, don't do that.
Let's not go there. May Zoom die a gracious death from our lives after all this is over. I hate Zoom, but go ahead.
Oh, I don't. The things that I hate. Well,
I don't. Hate is a strong word, but yeah. We're talking through Skype and recording through pro software because we both do podcasts, but yeah.
I reserve hate for things whose breaths I can actually extinguish.
Nah, yeah, I don't really.
Giant corporations.
Hate's a strong word.
They're going to win every time.
Hate's a strong word.
We'll see.
Nice. Well, I'm going to, ask you to fasten your seatbelt and return your tray table to their locked upright position. Kind of land the plane here shortly. And I had a question that on kind of our pregame list. Any wise parting words for the kids at home? Frankly, you've given us a lot of wise things to think about. But I'm wondering, because again, I know you I know you from our common experience teaching the kids in the MFA and other programs in filmmaking. Do you have a handful of those kernels of wisdom? Do you have a handful of things that you would tell somebody, even just like a creative person who's trying to find themselves or figure out how to get a career going or get a stalled career unstuck? Do you have any sort of thoughts? I mean, there's a lot of it in this conversation. I'm just kind of asking you if you have like any kind of fortune cookies along those lines, or if you want to go deep as hell. I mean, I'm not in a hurry, but I didn't want to.
No, I think
limit
that,
you.
some of it surmises some of the things that I talked about. Fear. You absolutely cannot wait for things to be perfect, and you absolutely cannot wait for things to be finished. Or let me rephrase that. You can't wait for things. I'm like saying 7 things at once. You cannot wait for things to be perfect, and you cannot wait for things to be easy.
Yeah.
And you absolutely have to finish what you start. And you can't do it waiting for anybody else. Nothing gets more people on board what you're trying to do than doing it. And you have got to aim, like I said earlier, right at the fear and right at the failure, because there is no failure. Failure is this construct created by your ego that you even deserve to win, or that your concept of success is actually success. How many times have you failed, and in failing developed a relationship or a skill that has benefited you in ways that have brought you way beyond what success would have been in that moment? You have got to fall so many times, and the majority of people who you would view as a success from where you're standing spent most of that time in failure. And you have to get through that stuff, and you will always fail. And there's a beauty to it, because failure isn't failure, it's feedback. And there's no perfection, there's only progress. And so we're only talking about point of view, and point of view in your perspective is just a snapshot. It's not where you're going to be in 10 years. It's not where you were 20 years ago. And so don't fall prey to it. Don't watch the social media comparison game of other people's pretty Instagrams. You're comparing your snapshot to their snapshot, but you might walk off the wrong curb next week, or you might scratch the winning lotto ticket. And that changes everything. So just keep your awareness and don't give in to the ego that says that you deserve these things, or things should be like someone else's, or that you have something good coming to you. You have to fight for it, and you have to keep moving. It will never be easy, and it will never be perfect. Does that make sense? I think you're okay with that?
It's beyond perfect. I love it.
There is no perfect. I shouldn't have asked that. There's only progress.
Well, I was thinking of course, the one Yoda line everybody can quote of, do or do not.
Don't try.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Oh, you were doing a voice. What was your Yoda voice?
I'm auditioning for your puppet project.
Please, hit me there. Yeah.
No, I can't do Frank Oz. He's a master.
Yeah.
He's a master. Frank Oz is amazing.
Yes, he is. Nice.
I saw him at a Starbucks in Los Feliz, and he was meeting with Ahmed, who played Jar Jar, and they were talking about Ahmed's one-man show. And I know Ahmed from being on GEEKSCAPE, but I also knew that he was meeting with Frank Oz, and there was no way I was going to go over there and interrupt that conversation.
Exactly.
But talk about someone who was deemed a failure because he played Jar Jar but turned into a beautiful person. And when he came on GEEKSCAPE and I asked him about Jar Jar, he said, "Why would I hate Jar Jar? Jar Jar gave me my wife, my kids, and my life."
Wow.
And other people can hate Jar Jar. I can't hate Jar Jar because Jar Jar was a gift to me. And
that's beautiful.
Even though that the derision that character got drove Ahmed almost to suicide.
Yeah.
it gave him perspective, and he has it to his day. And Ahmed Best is a beautiful person, and I think he's amazing. So you have to not think about where you're at. You have to think about where you're going and where you've been, and just keep moving. Just keep moving and check that awareness. Meditation, exercise, it's good places to find that.
Exactly. Well, speaking of finding people and places and things, the best place to point people to find out more about Jonathan London World is...
You can obviously subscribe to Geekscape. That's our podcast. If you search for Geekscape, you're going to find a lot of the podcasts on our network, and I love all of them. But mine is the flagship show, Geekscape. I'm also on Twitter at Jonathan London. You can send me a friend request on Facebook. And there's Instagram. I'm at geekscape.net on Instagram. But if you just search for Jonathan London, you'll either find me or you'll find the children's book author who does the Froggy books. Either way, you're going to have a good time, whether or not you're reading the Froggy books or you're listening to me talk some stuff or watching any of our short films or feature films. And we'll just see. That's about it. Just do what you guys want. And
nice.
If we cross paths again, we'll say hello.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Jonathan.
Well, thank you, Brennan. I like talking to you.